everybody. My name is Martin Webster. I'm one of the initiators of a new group in Britain called the Forgotten British Heroes Campaign. This is to honour the British servicemen and Crown servants and civilians who were murdered by Israeli, or not, they weren't even Israelis by that time, Jewish terrorists in Palestine when British soldiers were still fighting in the Second World War, in a war which we're told was fought, amongst other things, to protect the survival of Jewry, and that was how Jewry repaid us. We wanted to deliver a letter recalling these awful record of Zionist terrorism to the Israeli ambassador. But over the road there, in Kensington Palace Gardens, is the Israeli embassy. You can possibly see bits of the Israeli flag flying, and we were refused permission to deliver our letter, and that embassy is completely surrounded by British policemen bearing Heckler and Koch submachine guns. We don't know of any embassy in London that's similarly protected. And the question is it because the whole of the world is malignantly disposed towards the Jews, or is it that the Jewish state is malignantly disposed to everybody else and needs the protection from its own crimes? At any rate, I'll introduce you to my colleagues. Firstly, Lady Michelle Renouf, a filmmaker of some repute, of telling films, who has supported the pro-Palestinian cause for many years. Next to her is Peter Rushton, a historian who will, at our meeting later today, be giving a full account of the awful history of Zionist terrorism and the plain fact that the scourge of modern terrorism today was founded and invented by Zionist terrorists in the 1940s. Here, the gentleman with the medals is a recently retired soldier from the British Army, Jez Turner, who runs the London Forum, which is a free speech facility for patriots and nationalists in Britain with guests from all over the world. And he will be laying a wreath for us at a site of a Zionist bombing near Trafalgar Square a little later this afternoon. And my colleague here on the right is Richard Edmonds, who is a veteran British nationalist who I knew and worked with 30 and more years ago in the National Front, and who is still active and campaigning today, and he will be speaking at our meeting later this afternoon. We've been unable to deliver our letter in person, but it has in fact been delivered by the usual method. But we thought we would draw your attention to the incredible security that's surrounding the Israeli embassy. It speaks an awful lot about the repute in which Israel is held today. So shortly now we'll close down and move off to the site of the bombing at the British Colonies Club just off Trafalgar Square. Thank you. This is a demonstration by the Forgotten British Heroes Campaign. Here behind us you see a nice, well-constructed building, but in fact in March 1947 it was a bomb site. It wasn't a bomb site caused by a German Nazi bomb falling on London. It was a bomb caused by an explosion created by Zionist terrorists, namely the Irgun. There were huge numbers of casualties and people maimed here. Today is also the anniversary of the hanging of two 20-year-old British boys, British Army Sergeants Clifford Martin and Mervyn Pace, two sergeants who were kidnapped in Palestine by the Irgun as hostages against two or three other Irgun terrorists who were arrested and convicted according to law of murder of British troops. And Menachem Begin, the leader of the Irgun, who was later to become Prime Minister of Israel, ordered that these two British kidnapped boys be hanged with wire if the Jewish terrorists were hanged according to law. Those terrorists were hanged according to law, and the two British sergeants were hanged as Begin had promised. Their bodies were then displayed from trees in Netanya, Palestine, and the area around them was mined so that people who came to cut the bodies down would also be blown up. At a similar time in the history of Britain's custodianship of Palestine, a huge bomb was placed by the Irgun Zionist terrorists in the basement of the King David Hotel. That explosion killed 100 people, British soldiers, servicemen, crown servants and civilians. And again at about this time there was the appalling massacre in Palestine of the people of the village of Deir Yassin. These Palestinians, 240 of them, were taken from their homes by these Jewish terrorists and machine gunned in front of their own homes. This is now all forgotten by the establishment. They don't want us to remember that the founders of the modern day terrorism which is afflicting the world was in fact created by Zionist terrorists in the 1940s. Even when Britain was still fighting Nazi Germany, we're told in a war to protect Jewish interests, Jewish terrorists were busy murdering British Crown servants. In November 1944, while the Second World War was still taking place, Lord Moyne and his driver were shot by another Zionist terrorist group called the Lehi, and that the people who did those murders have been honoured by the modern state of Israel. We will not forget these murders, we will not forget these atrocities, and we will be laying a wreath here to commemorate the bomb that blew up what was once here in 1947, and in commemoration of the other British and Palestinian victims of Zionist terrorism. And now Jez Turner, who is a British ex-serviceman himself, will now lay the wreath in honour of these people. Thank you, Jez. And now I'd like to ask Jez to address you all with some words.
At 11 a.m. on the 11th of November, Remembrance Day, wreaths are laid at the Cenotaph in Whitehall to commemorate Britain's war dead. The Queen and the royal family are present. The top politicians and leaders of this country are present. Wreaths are laid to commemorate the fallen from all Britain's campaigns and all the counter-insurgencies that Britain was involved with. World War I, World War II, Malaya, Korea, Northern Ireland, etc., etc. All our campaigns are remembered, all of them, except for one. A wreath is not allowed on that day to be laid for the fallen from the Palestine campaign. The Palestine insurgency, where British forces were targeted by Jewish extremists known as Zionists. Between 1944 and 1948 in the Palestine Mandate, 700 plus British soldiers and 200 plus British police were murdered by Zionist terrorists. And yet, the names of these fallen servicemen and policemen do not appear on any memorial, not on any memorial to World War II, not on any memorial to Britain's post-war campaigns. Nor is a wreath allowed to be laid on their behalf at the Cenotaph in Whitehall. They are our forgotten heroes, intentionally forgotten, forgotten on purpose. They are forgotten by our mass media. They are forgotten by our politicians. And they are forgotten by the powers that be. But they are not forgotten by me and those here today. And we will not forget either that many of these Zionist terrorists who carried out these attacks were never brought to justice. And many of these terrorists are alive and well today, reveling in their freedom and gloating over their crimes. Well, we want to see justice done. And we await the day when justice will return to England. And until that day, we will not forget their victims. We will not forget the British personnel who fell in Palestine. We will not forget the forgotten heroes. We will remember. Thank you very much.
And now I'd like Peter Rushton, who is one of the organisers of this campaign, to conclude this short little meeting with an address. Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you, Martin. The bombing of this facility, this club for colonial servicemen in March 1947, was carried out on the orders of the Stern Gang, also known as the Lehi. The men responsible for covering up that atrocity and making sure that that and many others were never punished include members of three governments. The government of Israel, which ended up being headed as Prime Minister by the man who was commander of the Stern Gang at the time the order for this bombing and so many other atrocities was given, Yitzhak Shamir. The government of Britain, which eventually colluded in the many lies and coverings up of Zionist terrorism since 1948, having resisted between 1945 and 1948, later British governments colluded in the failure to pursue and prosecute the terrorists responsible for this and other atrocities, and not least the government of France, whose intelligence services, it is now becoming clear, armed, trained and funded Zionist terrorists during the 1945 to 48 period. So we come here not only as an act of remembrance, not only as a long overdue act of remembrance for the victims of this and other crimes, but in determination to demand from today's representatives of those three governments that they make long overdue reparations and long overdue confessions of the truth. Recognition and reconciliation can only come on the basis of truth and justice. Therefore, we call on the British, French and Israeli governments to tell the truth about this and other atrocities, and we call on the man who planted the bomb on this site, a young philosophy student from Paris named Robert Mizrahi, a man who went on to be Professor of Ethical Philosophy at the Sorbonne and is still alive in Paris to this day. We call on Robert Mizrahi to be brought here to London as one of the last surviving witnesses, one of the last surviving terrorists responsible not only directly for this crime where he personally planted the bomb, but for many other crimes across Europe and across Palestine. We call on Professor Mizrahi personally and on the governments of Britain, France and Israel to make a long overdue recognition of the facts, to make long overdue reparations to the victims, and to lay the long overdue foundations for a replacement of the present unjust, blood-soaked tyranny in Palestine, for a future for that benighted region based on truth and justice. Thank you very much.
And now, our wreath, which we formally placed here at the site of the atrocity, so well described by Peter and by Jez just a few moments ago. Our wreath is now to be taken in by St Martin in the Fields Church, which owns this site, and placed in a special chapel of remembrance. And we're very grateful to St Martin in the Fields Church for taking in this wreath and keeping it as not a souvenir but a memorial to future generations that our heroes in Palestine are not forgotten. Thank you for coming today.
Welcome to the Forgotten Heroes campaign inaugural meeting. Now this year, on the 22nd of July, the anniversary of the King David Hotel bombing, yours truly placed an advert, an announcement, in the personal column of the Daily Telegraph. And I paid for it, I placed it, and it said, "Of your charity, please pray for the souls of the victims of the King David Hotel bombing." And it was accepted. Well, and on that day, that morning, I bought the paper and I looked at the personal columns, and there's a big blank. Yeah. Big blank. And I phoned up the lady. I said, "I paid for this advert. Where is it?" And she said, "Oh dear." Silence. "Oh, we forgot." But I will try again next year.
Pay for the apology.
Now every year the British Nationalist Friends of Palestine have held a meeting for the last 3 or 4 years to coincide with Nakba Day, the catastrophe day, the day when Israel was created. This year various nationalists have got together and upped the ante somewhat and created the Forgotten British Heroes campaign. And who would have thought it? A well-publicised nationalist event, advertised on numerous websites, press releases to all and sundry, an event staged in the centre of London, Trafalgar Square, on a Saturday afternoon, the very centre of London, and absolutely no opposition. To me, no victory. And I think we should make it an annual event, don't you? Yeah. So here's what the wreath said, and this wreath now sits in St Martin's in the Fields Church. "In remembrance of the victims of Zionist terrorist atrocities, both in Britain and Palestine, especially the following: those injured and maimed by a bomb placed near this spot at the British Colonist Club on 7th of March 1947. Sergeants Mervyn Pace and Clifford Martin, who were kidnapped by Irgun terrorists, tortured and hanged by piano wire from eucalyptus trees at Netanyahu, Palestine. The area being mined in an effort to kill those who came to retrieve the bodies. And this was carried out on the 31st of July 1947. The 100 British Army soldiers, Crown servants and civilians murdered by a huge bomb placed by the Irgun in the King David Hotel, Jerusalem on 22nd of July 1946. Rex Farron, brother of Captain Roy Farron, DSOMC, an SAS anti-terrorism specialist, murdered by a Stern Gang parcel bomb sent to R. Farron at the family home in Staffordshire on 6th of May 1948. Lord Walter Moyne, DSO, Secretary of State for the Colonies, and his driver, Corporal Fuller, gunned down by Stern Gang assassins in Cairo on 6th of November 1944. We were fighting a war for these bastards. They do that to us. And of course, the 250 Palestinian villagers of Deir Yassin massacred by the Irgun and Stern Gang in a joint ethnic cleansing operation on 10th of April 1948. And all the other victims, too many to mention, all the other villages wiped out by them. So here we are, Forgotten Heroes campaign. And we've got 4 speakers today for you. The last speaker will be Peter Rushton. The last but not least will be Lady Michelle Renouf showing her film. The second speaker will be Martin Webster. And the first speaker, who will speak on the theme, in the ongoing and future wars between the State of Israel and the Arab Muslim world, Great Britain should be strictly neutral, because Britain owes Israel, and I will add, or the Jews, absolutely nothing. Yeah. Please welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think and I know that today was the first time ever that British people, British patriots, have stood in the very centre of our capital and paid tribute to those British soldiers murdered by Zionist terrorists. All credit to the organisers, all credit who conceived the idea of doing this, and all credit to the various organisers who pulled the thing together, promoted the activity, and all credit to yourselves for standing there with us in the very centre of London, making the valid points which have never been made in this capital before, statements never been made before, and all credit to the guys who film these things, because the fact is, we have this meeting here this afternoon, but since it's been filmed, it will go to the world, and it will educate the white world, and it will inspire the white world, and possibly beyond the white world. So, I've been very busy today rushing around with the rest of you, and I would just like to say this. We have remembered today the victims, the British victims of Zionist terrorism. This was the bloody and vicious series of murders and bomb outrages committed by Jewish terrorists at the end of the Second World War, both here in the United Kingdom and in the Middle East. As Jez said in his introduction, even before the Second World War was over, Jewish terrorists set about and murdered the top political representative of the British government, located in that key location of Cairo, Egypt, right in the centre of the Middle East. We are talking here of the assassination of Lord Moyne in November 1944. This assassination of the top British political representative of the British government in the Middle East, this assassination was the first act of terrorism organised by Zionists in their campaign to establish the Jewish state of Israel. As Jez announced, the other speakers are going to detail the bloody carnage that was inflicted on British troops and British officials and those nominally in their care and protection. What I'd like to emphasise here and now is that with the assassination of this representative of the British government in the Middle East, the Zionists had not waited the Second World War to end before commencing their bloody insurrection. Whatever one may think of the Second World War, and whatever one might think of the allegation that the Germans were murdering millions of Jews during that war, the two indisputable facts are, two facts beyond all dispute are, that firstly, the British had waged war at enormous cost against the Germans for 6 long, weary years. And the other fact, beyond all dispute, is that there was no love lost between the Jews and Adolf Hitler's Germany. And yet, before the war was over, what might be described as the infamous stab in the back was committed by Jewish terrorists. The establishment of the Jewish state of Israel in 1948 and the two world wars are intimately interconnected and interlinked. British troops were in possession of Palestine during the Second World War because British troops, the British Army, had driven the Turks out of Palestine and indeed out of the whole of the Arab Middle East during the First World War. One of the motives of the British government for this takeover of the Middle East was to fulfill the obligations that they had undertaken with Lord Rothschild in 1916. Now in 1916, in the middle of the First World War, the British and the Germans were deadlocked, both on the Western Front and in all theatres of the First World War. And Lord Rothschild, regarded as the head of the Jewish people, had indicated to the British government that if they were to drive the Turks out of the Holy Land, and if they were to arrange for the establishment of a national homeland for the Jews in Palestine, then he, Lord Rothschild, would use his influence with the United States of America, which was neutral at the time, of course, 1916, 1917, that he, Rothschild, would use his influence with the United States of America, with all its tremendous wealth, industrial power, plus 1 million US soldiers, that he would use his influence to bring the United States of America onto the side of the Allies, and so give the British and the French the victory over the Germans, which they could not achieve themselves. The deal with Rothschild was signed and sealed and is known as the Balfour Declaration of 1917. Balfour, Arthur Balfour, was a Tory politician who was the British Foreign Secretary at the time. The Balfour Declaration formally established the national homeland for the Jews in Palestine. As soon as the First World War was over, in the 1920s and the 1930s, Jewish immigrants poured into Palestine, and the British authorities had the devil's own job to control the situation, because the native Arabs, the local Arabs, the Palestinians could see that they were in danger of losing their land to these Jewish migrants. Gentlemen, take the words out of my mouth. You take the words out of my mouth. The British authorities, for their part, assured the Arabs, don't worry, there's only going to be a few Jewish immigrants. Don't worry, Palestine will remain Arab for all time to come. You recognise the rhetoric, don't you? It's identical to these lying politicians at Westminster. Identical. Right, that's how you get a round of applause in this meeting. Right, so the British authorities, come the end of the Second World War, the British authorities lose control of the situation. assassination of Lord Moyne in November 1944 was just the beginning, which other speakers are going to dot the I's and cross the T's, of a vicious, bloody insurrection. That was the start in November 1944. And after 4 years of bloody insurrection, the Zionists succeeded, A, in driving the British out, and secondly, in establishing their Jewish state of Israel. That's how it was done. That's how it was done. In conclusion, I'm concluding now, and as the other speakers will confirm, the state of Israel was spawned, given birth to, in the blood of British soldiers and British officials and those nominally in their charge. And so I will say to you in conclusion that Britain owes Israel nothing, and in the ongoing wars in the Middle East and in the future wars of the Middle East between Israel and its Arab Muslim neighbours, the rest of the Middle East, Great Britain should remain strictly neutral. Thank you very much.
Now, our next speaker doesn't really need any introduction, but I'll give him one. He's one of the staunchest anti-Zionist campaigners in British nationalism, and he's here to talk about an event where a lot is talked about arresting ministers of state, politicians for war crimes. Well, the first people to do this, to try this, was actually the National Front in 1977. And he's going to talk about how the establishment, we know who they are, the you-know-whos, how the establishment frustrated the attempt to have the war criminal and terrorist and butcher Menachem Begin arrested when he came to the UK as Israel's Prime Minister in 1977. So please put your hands together and give a warm welcome to a man who's much larger than life, Martin Webster!
Introduction, Jez. Yes, if you study left-wing publications or the national news media, you'll often find references to attempts by various left-wing groups, particularly the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, which is dominated by Jews, to make sure that people who oppose Israel are not anti-Semites. Well, they do that, in fact. Though the Palestine Solidarity Campaign proclaims that it is against all forms of racism, in fact it allows its Jewish membership to have private meetings just for Jews only. Absolutely. In order to monitor the activities of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign to make sure that they're not being anti-Semitic. And they are claiming all the time that they are behind various campaigns to get the British government to use various national and international laws to inflict arrest warrants, international arrest warrants, against notorious Zionist war criminals, which the Labour government and the Tory government in the last 20 years or so have been very reluctant to do. There have been occasions when various Israeli Defence Force, IDF, senior officers have refused to get off planes in Britain when they're on exchange flights, say to America, for fear of arrest for their war crimes in Gaza, in Lebanon and elsewhere. And other cases where such people have refused even to risk landing in Britain and staying on the plane for fear of arrest. They know they're guilty. They know they're criminals. But the left boasts that it's them who initiated this effort to get Zionist war criminals arrested. Well, if you're a British nationalist, and if you've been supporting the British nationalist cause for some decades, you will know that it wasn't them, it wasn't the left, it wasn't the international left-wing so-called conscience that started this campaign to get Israeli war criminals arrested. It was us, the British nationalist movement, specifically the National Front. It's something that is hidden in the history books, but I hope, due to the efforts of our wonderful cameraman here, who's back in the corner there, behind his magic video machine, and to whom we're all very grateful, I hope that through these efforts we can start to bring to the world the information that it was British nationalists, so-called racists, who were behind the campaign to get Israeli war criminals arrested and tried for their crimes. And it was us who focused from the very beginning on the appalling murders of British servicemen and Crown servants by Israelis who now own the Conservative Party, the Labour Party, the Liberal Party, and probably, for all I know, the Scottish National Party. All the main parliamentary political parties are prostitutes to the Jews. The Jews provide them with the money to keep in office or for the chance to get back into office, and for that they will suppress, we've already heard this afternoon how Palestine policemen and soldiers are not allowed to lay a wreath at the cenotaph, along with all other contingents of British servicemen, because it would embarrass the Jews. Why are these Palestinian police being allowed to have a wreath laying at the cenotaph? And the media would have to answer, because those boys were killed defending British troops and people under our supervision from Zionist terrorists. So rather than allow that, they don't allow the Palestine police and soldiers who were active in Palestine to lay the wreath along with anybody else. In 1977, when the National Front's headquarters was still at Teddington, Connaught Road, Teddington, how many people went along to that office? Do some of you remember it? A few people here do. Some of us are still alive, aren't we? And one day I was in the office there, and we were called on by one of the officers of the Kingston and Richmond branch of the National Front, a man called Jim Sawyer. Skinny little man he was, bald head. He used to be referred to by his local branch, because he's such a skinny chap, as the Screaming Skull. But he was a lovely man, and he was earning his living as a self-employed driving instructor. And he came in with a bit of newspaper. He said, "Martin, have you seen this? Menachem Begin is coming to Britain." And I wasn't as fully informed then as I am now. And I said, "Well, Jim, yes. But he's the Prime Minister of Israel and he's a war criminal. Tell me about it, Jim." He said, "Well, look, I was in the cherry pickers, I forget the name of the regiment now, but it was the same regiment that did the charge of the Light Brigade 100 or so years before."
11th Hussars?
Yes, he was in that. Thank you very much. Thank you for reminding me. I'm very grateful. The 11th Hussars. And then towards the end of the war, he volunteered to become a policeman in the Palestine police. He had a very good contact record. He was a sergeant, and he was admitted into the Palestine police, and he told me of the terrible things that the Zionist terrorists, the Irgun, Lumi, headed by Menachem Begin, and the Lehi, or the Stern Gang, read by a man, I think, called Shamir. And both of those people ended up, may I say, as prime ministers of Israel. So their criminal terrorist record has been endorsed by the Jewish population of Israel, so they are equally culpable in their guilt. Let us not forget. And having been given a quick tutorial by Jim about that, I said, well, look, if this man is coming to Britain as Prime Minister of Israel, and if, as you say, that the arrest warrant for Menachem Begin has never been rescinded by the British government, and the reward of £10,000 was offered in 1948. Now, £10,000 in 1948 is the equivalent in spending power of about £300,000 today. So you can imagine the seriousness of the various crimes that Begin was guilty of and was wanted for by the British government. But the British government, subsequent to 1948, didn't have the courage or the political honesty to say, we now withdraw that warrant. It just left it in the pending tray in the hope that everybody would forget about it. But the men who served in Palestine, including our friend Jim, who's now dead, I'm afraid, one of our comrades who's gone to that great anti-immigration rally in the sky, haven't forgotten. And I said, right, he's coming in at what time, going what time, and I spent almost all night with Jim on my typewriter. We didn't have computers in those days, just before the beginning of the internet and IT and all that stuff. But pounding away on this manual typewriter, getting down a long affidavit from Jim about his service in Palestine. And here is his affidavit. I must get it scanned and copied before it moulders away. This is Jim's affidavit concerning his service as a policeman in Palestine in that period. It is a sworn affidavit. And I said, right, well, which magistrate court do we go to? And I thought, right, Mervyn Pace lived in Bristol. In fact, at that particular time, in 1977, his brother, who was just called Pace as a cartoonist, was the main cartoonist for the Bristol Evening Post. So I thought the place we go to is to apply for this warrant to be applied, is the place where one of the victims of Begin was living. That's the family home of the Pace family. So I got the affidavit sworn before a local Teddington commissioner for oaths, and we zoomed off in Jim's car with a couple of other bodies in the back down to Bristol, and we quickly got to Bristol Magistrates Court and made an application to the clerk of the court to make an application to the magistrates for an arrest warrant for a person coming to Britain who had just arrived in Britain, and we wanted to arrest him for war crimes on the basis of a warrant that was issued by the British government at the time and which was still extant. And I'll explain to you how that went. I'll read. I don't generally in these talks like reading from documents, but this is important. It's important that we get the dates down online. This is the only copy left of a National Front photocopied press statement of the time. Let me put my specs on. And it's dated 2nd December 1977. National Front to oppose visit to Britain of Menachem Begin, former Palestine police officer, to seek arrest warrant for Begin on charges of murder, kidnapping and assault of 2 British Army sergeants, Mervyn Pace and Clifford Martin. National Front member Mr. James Sawyer, 63, a former first sergeant of the Palestine police during the period of British mandate, has yesterday evening, Thursday 1st December 1977, sworn out an affidavit before a commissioner for oaths in Teddington, Middlesex, which he will seek to present together with exhibits to City of Bristol magistrates next Monday, 5th December, in order to make application for the issue of a warrant for the arrest of Menachem Begin, the Prime Minister of Israel, during his forthcoming visit to Britain. The affidavit gives specific evidence in reference to the murder by Menachem Begin of 2 British Army sergeants, Mervyn Pace and Clifford Martin, on or about 30th July 1947. Pace and Martin were kidnapped by members of the criminal terrorist organisation known as the Irgun, whose, quote, commander-in-chief, unquote, was Menachem Begin. At Begin's orders, the 2 sergeants were hanged, and later their corpses were suspended by piano wire from a tree in a eucalyptus grove near Netanya. Mr. Sawyer will be making his application to magistrates in Bristol, as Bristol was the hometown of one of the 2 murdered sergeants, Mervyn Pace. Mr. Sawyer will enter the Bristol Magistrates Court, Clerk's Office, Bridewell, Bristol, between 9 and 9:15 next Monday, 5th December. The main item of evidence to be presented by Mr. Sawyer with his affidavit is a copy of Menachem Begin's autobiography, The Revolt. Should be called The Revolting, actually. Story of the Irgun, published in Israel in 1972. The affidavit refers in particular to the book's 21st chapter, pages 278 to 290, in which the author, in effect, unequivocally indicts himself of the murder of Payson Martin. Quote, "The next day, the two Britons were hanged. We repaid our enemy in kind," unquote. In addition to giving specific details of the murder of Payson Martin, the affidavit also details a number of other murders, bombings, exterminations, and other war crimes perpetrated by Begin and/or at his orders. The affidavit quotes from the conclusion to the introduction to the revolt, written by Begin, in which he boasts that he would carry out the same crimes again if he felt it was necessary. So, we appeared before the magistrate. We handed over Jim's copious affidavit dealing, this is a statement, you see, by a police sergeant, and in those days, a white British police sergeant in the Palestine police force was quite a senior chap. These were his precise recollections of the attack on, for example, the fort at Acre, the fortress at Acre, where Irgun prisoners were held, and the Irgun made an attack on the fortress of Acre in order to liberate the Irgun terrorist prisoners held there. And the soldiers and Palestine policemen fought a battle with these terrorists and arrested some of them. But only after these terrorists had killed several British soldiers and policemen. So they were indicted for murder, and they were arraigned before a court which nobody disputes was a fully, properly, legally constituted court under the law of that land and under various United Nations regulations. It was then the UN that was running the international legal system. They were tried and convicted according to law and sentenced to death, which was the penalty for terrorist murders in that time, in that place. Begin arranged for two 20-year-olds. I emphasise 20-year-old because when I first heard about this, I was about 19 or 20, so I didn't think too much about the age difference. But now I'm 72, and I look at people about the place who are 20, and I think these are just boys. These are innocent boys. But they were kidnapped and held in order to escape discovery in earthenware pits that were dug out in the ground to make sound muffled, and they were held there for 23 3/4 hours a day with just a canvas bucket for their immediate sanitary needs, and allowed out for 5 or 6 minutes to get a breath of fresh air before they were put back in these holes again. Now I regard that as torture to begin with. But then when these convicted Zionist terrorist murderers were hanged, those boys were hanged, and then their bodies were suspended, as stated, in the eucalyptus groves at Netanya in Palestine by piano wire. How lovely. How lovely. What nice, humane Jewish minds thought that up. And not only that, the area around where the bodies were mined with booby trap explosives, so that the people engaged in the humanitarian task of cutting down murdered 20-year-old boys so that they might also be blown up. Fortunately, the British services were wise to Jewish treacherous terrorist tricks by that time, and they searched the ground carefully, and the bodies were cut down in a safe way. All this information and this book by Begin, where he boasts of his terrorist criminality, were presented to the magistrates at Bristol, and they retired for an hour. And they came back, and the chief magistrate, I've got his name amongst all this bundle of papers, but I won't waste your time searching for a particular Tudor something or other. He was a Welshman at any rate, but I'm sure any magistrate from any part of the United Kingdom under the thumb of the establishment and the legal system would have given the same judgment. So I'm not blaming the Welsh for this. He said, "We reject your application, Mr. Sawyer, and we won't give a reason for it." Now, not giving they're entitled to reject on the basis of law and technicalities. But they're not entitled, and you see Jim and I weren't lawyers, they're not entitled not to give a reason. That's like arresting somebody and putting him in jail, it's contrary to Magna Carta, without giving them a reason. And we were advised that after we left the court, obviously a bit downcast, that the refusal by the magistracy to give a reason was unlawful, and that we'd have to pursue at the High Court in London an application for an order of mandamus, I think that's what it was called, ordering the magistrate to give a reason. So we zoomed back in Jim's car, zoomed back into London, drafted out more affidavits, and presented ourselves to the High Court, to the various offices of administrators you've got to present yourself to there. And after an hour or so, it became quite clear to us, we'll be giving a runaround. Oh, that's not right, I've got to do this, and go along to that office and get a paper from them, and go. We were given the runaround. And we were given the runaround by, I won't give you my common description of the subject of the information that we were giving, but it begins with B and ends in X. And they held us running around for as long as it took for Menachem Begin to fly out of the country. Whereupon, of course, the application was nonsense, and he never came back to Britain again, so far as I know. But this gives you an example. And why did this happen? It happened because the Conservative Party, the Labour Party and the Liberal Party depend on the donations from then millionaire, now billionaire Zionist Jews to keep their party going, to give them an opportunity to stay in office if they are holding office, or to get back into office if they're out of office. And they need the support of the British media, which is largely dominated by Zionist Jewry. That's the fact of the matter. And it was for the same reason that Palestine servicemen are obstructed from laying their wreath at the Cenotaph on a National Remembrance Day, is the same reason why the legal system, the establishment in charge of the legal system, gave us the runaround to allow a war criminal for whom a British government warrant was still extant. It still stood to escape the country without him being brought to justice. If ever there was a grotesque example of the way in which our legal system, our sense of justice, is capable of being warped by Zionist Jewish money influence over our parliamentary system, over our democracy, then that was it. It was an absolute outrage. But it's something we should never forget. We should always rehearse to our friends. The details will be out. I will reprint Jim's affidavit and put it onto the internet for you. But we must never forget this awful atrocity. But one thing I want British nationalists in here to remember, that the people who started the campaign to get Zionist war criminals arrested wasn't any left-wing group of campaigners. It was us, the National Front, who did it. I've extended my time, I apologise, and I look forward to the next speakers. Thank you for your attention.